I do think there's been a sea change. After all, Isaac Newton, who discovered gravitation, believed in God, and gravity was one of the reasons. When he discovered his law, he said, what a marvelous God who did it that way. He didn't say, now we've got an explanation, we don't need God. And that's because he wasn't like Stephen Hawking. One of the shifts, I think, Jeff, is that the concept of God has changed in the mind of many scientists. And people like Hawking and Dawkins and others I've encountered, they do not conceive of God as a triune eternal God, the creator of the Bible. They believe in a kind of Greek god of lightning that we now call a god of the gaps. I can't explain it, therefore God did it. And you do a bit of science or atmospheric physics at the University of Wisconsin, and that God disappears. And so as science advances, the space for God gets less. And suddenly it occurred to me that Hawking's big problem, because Stephen Hawking, who's a brilliant scientist, light years better than me, but he asked young people like yourselves to choose between science and God, and I found that very puzzling until I realized that his definition of God was the problem. He believes God is an explanatory X that holds the space until science comes up with a better explanation. Now, if you believe in a God of gaps like that, then of course you have to choose between science and God, because that's the way you've defined God. The God of the Bible, the God in whom I believe, is not the God of the gaps. Genesis does not begin, just in case you didn't realize, with the words, in the beginning God created the bits of the universe I don't understand. It's in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, which is a merism grammatically. He created the whole show, the bits we understand and the bits we don't. So there's a huge problem with God that's driving this. The second point, if I may make a second point, lies in the nature of explanation. You see, science explains marvelously, as Jeff pointed out, but the problem is that explanation comes at different levels. And people think that once they've got a scientific explanation, this is Hawking's view. He doesn't believe in God. Why? I quote, because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Now, I'm not going to point out the 3 levels of contradiction in that statement. But what he does is, we've got a scientific explanation for something, therefore there's no God. But just a minute, why is the water boiling? Well, because the heat energy is agitating the molecules conducted through the kettle bottom, and that's why the water is boiling. No, it isn't. It's boiling because I'd like a cup of tea. Now, you laugh. Why? Because you see that those 2 explanations don't actually conflict or contradict. They're different kinds of explanation. One's scientific, the other's in terms of my volition, the volition of a personal agent. Now, let me say this to you, and this takes a lot of the steam out of the argument for me. God no more conflicts with science as an explanation for the universe than Henry Ford conflicts with the law of internal combustion as an explanation for a motor car engine. Now, that's how I would start to approach this. I think there's a huge epistemological and intellectual confusion out there. And Hawking, Dawkins, and others insist the scientific explanation is the only one. And that's nonsense, because the law of gravity, even within science, the one thing it does not explain is gravity. I hope you realize that. Nobody knows what gravity is, and Newton realized that. The law of gravity is a wonderful help to calculate how to put someone in the moon without even Einstein, but it doesn't tell you what gravity is. And there's a huge myth out there that if you've got a scientific explanation, that's all you need. No, it is not. And therefore, I agree with your initial statement, Larry, that science cannot, of its own methodology, and of course that's difficult to define, rule out the existence of God.